The story starts with a man named Nick Dunn, a laid-back man in his 40s, has been married to his beautiful wife, Amy, for 5 years. Today marks their 5th anniversary, but Nick doesn't seem excited. In fact, he's distant and uninterested. Instead of celebrating, he goes to a bar to grab a drink. The bartender is his twin sister, Margot, who quickly notices that something's wrong. When she asks, he sighs and simply says, "Amy," which brings us to a flashback of how they met. Years ago, Amy, a famous children's author, held a book launch event. Nick, a writer for a small men's magazine, was there as one of the attendees. They started chatting and bonded over their shared love for books. Amy was highly admired, and Nick, with his charm and good looks, managed to impress her. The two wandered around New York City that night, and when the time felt right, he kissed her. Their chemistry was undeniable, and the night ended with them in each other's arms. Back in the present, as Nick is talking with Margot, he gets an unexpected call from a neighbor who tells him that his cat is outside. Confused, Nick hurries home, brings the cat in, and then notices something strange. The front door is wide open. He calls out for Amy, but there's no answer. Nick searches around the house and stumbles upon a shattered glass table, which startles him. Alarmed, he immediately calls the police. Soon after, Detective Rhonda and her assistant arrive at the scene and begin investigating. As they examine the house, they notice a few drops of blood in odd places. When Detective Rhonda discovers Amy's books and realizes she's a well-known author, she starts treating the case as high-profile. At the police station, Nick is asked to complete a few tests. Once he's finished, Detective Rhonda assures him they're doing everything possible to find Amy. She explains that Amy's credit cards are being tracked, a forensics team is examining the crime scene, and a press conference will be held the next day to request the public's help. Oddly, Nick finds this entire process amusing and even compares it to a TV show, Law and Order. This reaction raises Detective Rhonda's first suspicions, and she starts questioning him more directly. As they talk, it becomes clear that Nick doesn't know much about Amy. He's unable to answer basic questions like her blood type, favorite food, or even her nickname. All he mentions is that Amy didn't have any friends and spent most of her time reading. The story flashes back to Nick and Amy's first wedding anniversary, when they were happy and in love. They would share intimate moments in unexpected places and surprise each other with lavish gifts. But they're unaware that life is about to take a darker turn. While Detective Rhonda is examining the crime scene, a pregnant woman named Noelle arrives, claiming to be Amy's best friend. She says she's lived nearby for over a year and was close with Amy. This puzzles Rhonda, as Nick had previously mentioned that Amy had no friends. Rhonda decides to question Noelle later and asks her to leave for now. Inside the Dunn residence, the forensic team informs Rhonda that the kitchen floor had been splattered with blood, though it appeared to have been cleaned up. They also discover that the house is entirely in Amy's name, raising further questions. The next day, a large press conference is held to appeal for help in finding Amy. Because Amy is a popular writer, hundreds of reporters show up, and the event is broadcasted live. Nick and Amy's parents are there to address the media. When it's Nick's turn to speak, he only manages a few brief sentences and then awkwardly smiles for a photo, which feels off to those watching. Later that night, Nick heads to his father's empty house to find some peace. However, Detective Rhonda has been trailing him and arrives shortly after. Annoyed, Nick escorts her out of the house and drives away. We're then shown another flashback to a time when Nick and Amy's relationship began to deteriorate. Amy, sensing the shift, starts writing everything down in her diary, documenting their struggles as they begin to grow apart. Nick and Amy have moved to Nick's hometown in Missouri to care for his terminally ill mother. They've been there for a few months, but Nick hasn't found a job yet, so Amy has had to borrow money from her wealthy parents to make ends meet. Money is tight, but Nick, unaccustomed to being unemployed, keeps spending on things like video games. Amy tries to reassure him that things will get better, but their conversations often end in arguments. In the present, 2 days have passed since Amy's disappearance. Amy's parents have organized an event to rally more people to help in the search, doing everything possible to find her. Nick, though, seems as nonchalant as ever, even taking selfies with attendees. That night, he decides to stay with his sister, Margot, hoping to escape the relentless paparazzi. On TV, Margot sees news channels criticizing Nick's behavior, questioning his lack of visible grief. Frustrated by the media's judgment, Margot confronts Nick, asking why he doesn't seem sad. Angry, Nick snaps back, saying he didn't expect this from her. He explains that the last 2 days have been a nightmare, and he just wants one night without feeling judged. Margot apologizes, and they both head to bed. But a few hours later, they're interrupted when a young woman unexpectedly enters the house and throws herself into Nick's arms. Nick's secret girlfriend, Andy, enters the scene, revealing why he seems so indifferent about Amy's disappearance. He's in love with someone else. That night, Nick and Andy share an intimate moment, but the next morning, Margot catches them and is furious that her brother kept this from her. Nick defends himself, explaining that Amy made him miserable. Over time, she stopped caring for him, and being with her became unbearable. He sought comfort elsewhere, which led him to Andy, one of his students. Shocked, Margot warns Nick that if the police find out, he'll be in serious trouble. She also shows him that his careless behavior is making headlines, and people are judging him harshly. A flashback reveals more details from Amy's diary, showing how she once hoped having a child would solve their problems. But Nick was firmly against the idea. During one heated argument, Nick accidentally shoved her, causing her to fall. Though he apologized, the incident left Amy feeling fearful and desperate. She began to believe that Nick only stayed with her for her parents' money, and divorce seemed like her only escape. From that point, Amy's diary shows her growing fear and distrust toward Nick, marking a turning point in their troubled relationship. In the present, Detective Rhonda receives the forensics report confirming that the blood found around the house belongs to Amy. That evening, Nick is asked to give another speech to a crowd of people. However, things take an unexpected turn when Amy's supposed best friend, Noelle, appears and shouts that Nick is hiding something. She grabs the crowd's attention and reveals that Amy was 6 weeks pregnant when she disappeared. The revelation shocks everyone, including Margot, Andy, and Amy's parents. The crowd turns against Nick, and the police have to escort him away. Later that night, as Nick drinks at home, Detective Rhonda confronts him with photographs showing that Amy and Noelle were indeed close friends. She also tells him that the blood in the kitchen is Amy's. With this new information, Rhonda concludes that Amy was murdered, and all she needs now is a body to confirm her theory and arrest Nick. After Detective Rhonda leaves, Margot asks Nick about Amy's pregnancy. Surprised, Nick admits he didn't know Amy was pregnant. In fact, Amy never wanted a child, and he had no idea about the pregnancy. Meanwhile, Detective Rhonda arrives at Nick's father's house looking for clues. She doesn't find a body, but she does discover Amy's half-burnt diary in the furnace. The story then takes a shocking turn. On the day of Amy's disappearance, it's revealed that Amy herself orchestrated the entire incident. She wasn't dead, she was the mastermind behind her own disappearance, setting up Nick to take the fall. Amy meticulously planned everything to frame her husband, Nick, for her disappearance. In her eyes, Nick had taken everything from her, lying, cheating, and stealing her pride and money. We see how she staged the entire scene. First, Amy befriended the simplest neighbor in the area, Noelle, and invited her to her home. Knowing Noelle was pregnant, Amy stole her urine sample and took it to a hospital to create fake medical records, making it look like she was pregnant with Nick's child. She also filled Noelle's head with lies, telling her that Nick had been abusive. For the crime scene, Amy drew 2 bags of her own blood and splattered it on the kitchen floor. She then cleaned it up in a careless manner to ensure that the police would find traces of blood. To further the illusion, she wrote fake entries in her diary, leaving them behind for the authorities to discover. This meant that Nick never assaulted her. Amy was actually the aggressive one. Meanwhile, Nick realizes his wife is trying to frame him, but with no proof, he decides to consult Tanner, one of the smartest lawyers in the country. Tanner quickly assesses the situation and offers advice on how Nick can win the case. Tanner advises Nick that in order to win the case, he needs to discredit Amy. The first step is to find someone she's wronged in the past and get them to testify. Nick thinks of the perfect person, Desi Collins, Amy's former boyfriend. Nick decides to track him down and visits Desi's mansion using the address from one of the letters. However, Desi refuses to speak negatively about Amy. Despite everything she's done, he still defends her and insists that he'll always love her. Meanwhile, Amy has completely changed her identity and is now living in a quiet, small neighborhood. She keeps to herself, staying away from everyone. But one day, while out, she accidentally drops a thick wad of cash, and a few of her neighbors notice. Later that night, those same neighbors attack her, beat her up, and steal the money. Amy's attempt to start fresh is shattered, and the violent encounter reminds her that her past continues to haunt her no matter how far she tries to run from it. The only positive thing for Amy after the attack is that her neighbors didn't recognize her as the Gone Girl from the news. Still, she's afraid it's only a matter of time before someone does, so she packs her things and leaves. With nowhere else to go, Amy calls the one person she knows will take her in, Desi Collins. The two meet at a casino, where Amy quickly begins manipulating Desi. She tells him that she had to run away because Nick was about to kill her. Desi buys her story and sees this as an opportunity to win her back. He takes her to his private villa, secluded in the middle of nowhere, where there are cameras set up to keep her safe from being found. Meanwhile, Tanner advises Nick to go on television and confess to his affair, hoping it will gain him sympathy. The public tends to support someone who admits their mistakes, but Nick wonders if they'll still feel sorry for a cheating man. On the day of the interview, however, things take an unexpected turn. Nick's girlfriend, Andy, unexpectedly reveals their relationship to the public, leaving Nick in an even worse position. Tanner advises Nick that going live on television would be a mistake, as they are already on the defensive. However, Nick insists that he can handle it. He goes on the interview, puts on a serious face, and delivers an emotional confession. While many viewers think he's faking it, Amy, watching from Desi's villa, is moved. She is especially touched when Nick says, "I will love my wife forever." After 21 days of causing a nationwide uproar with her disappearance, Amy begins to consider returning to Nick. However, there's a problem. Desi expects Amy to marry him. He's isolated himself in the villa with her, leaving his personal life behind. Amy knows that if she tries to leave, Desi could become violent. To escape, she decides to act. She sneaks into the bathroom, where there are no cameras, and ties a rope around her wrists to make it look like she was held captive. Then, she injures herself to make it appear as though she was assaulted, and positions herself in front of a camera, screaming for help. When Desi arrives, Amy seduces him, luring him into a moment of distraction. In a brutal twist, she kills him while he's caught off guard. Meanwhile, things are looking worse for Nick. Detective Rhonda has gone through Amy's diary and is getting closer to arresting him for her disappearance. One morning, everything changes when Amy returns home, covered in Desi's blood. This turns the case upside down. Doctors examine Amy and conclude that she was mistreated. Although Nick knows she's lying, he has no proof to back it up. In front of a crowd of officials, Amy tells her story. She claims that her possessive ex-boyfriend, Desi, kidnapped her and held her hostage for weeks. The story spreads quickly, and Amy once again becomes America's darling. Everyone believes her, except for Nick and his sister, Margot. The couple returns to their home, and the drama seems over. In Nick's eyes, Amy is a murderer, but Amy explains that everything she did was to get back to him. However, after everything that's happened, Nick is terrified to stay with her. He tells her that he's leaving, but Amy threatens to destroy his life if he tries to leave her. Nick realizes that he is trapped with this manipulative woman forever. The movie ends with Nick putting Amy to bed and locking the door from the outside, signifying that he no longer feels safe in his own home. The chilling final moment shows that Nick is caught in a dangerous and controlling relationship with no way out.